when people look at you and they don't see you, they look past you.
It's about believing that something should be different and having the courage to live in that transition zone.
We contain multitudes.
Why did I feel so awful so much of the time?
It is a place that is so steeped in like white patriarchy, and yet I never felt more myself and more among Black people.
The women's rooms, they were basically men's rooms, and the urinals were still in there.
I feel like I spent so much time trying to educate the Amherst College community that I didn't get enough time to just be a student.
This is Black Women of Amherst College, a storytelling project exploring the experiences and impact of Black women in elite higher education. I'm Nichelle Carr, Amherst College, class of 1998. This episode is about activism on campus. We wanted to focus on activism because of the many aspects of college life for students of color and for Black women in particular. Activism is an unavoidable part of their experience. As Black folks and students of color will know, when you go to a predominantly white institution that is not made for you, by you, or of you, your role is not only to be a student and to fulfill your own potential, but your role is also to help that institution serve you better as a student. The work of reforming a place like Amherst is a burden that the students of color, and in this story, Black women specifically, bear. College in general is a place for growing into adulthood, learning how you feel about the world and your potential to reshape that world. You're there because it's an amazing opportunity for you, but it is also an opportunity for you to try to make the world a better place. It's where we go to write the stories of who we are going to be. College can be a testing ground for how you enact change, and activism on campus is how you begin to put the new ideas and new philosophies that you're learning into practice. And then as a student of color, or a first-generation or low-income student, the stakes are high because it's often a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to improve the prospects for you, your family, and your community as a whole. As one of our alumnae said, all of the hopes and dreams of a family or a community are poured into that student who is entering this elite institution. As Sonia Sanchez said, we are walking in there with a herstory and a history. That student is standing on the shoulders of the ancestors who came before them. So you're struggling to live up to the ancestors on whose shoulders you stand, and you're struggling to help this institution get it right, because when they get it wrong, the person who suffers the most is the student. Protest is in the DNA of Amherst students, and a lot of the activism at Amherst College over the years has been spearheaded by Black students, men and women. In this episode, I want to tell 3 stories of activism at the college. The first story I want to tell you is about the takeover of Converse Hall in 1979. After that, I want to tell you about a fight in the 1990s to improve the academic experience at Amherst. Then the third story I'll tell you is about the sit-in at Frost Library in 2015, also known as the Amherst Uprising. Let's start with the Converse Takeover of 1979.
I said, well, here's the building. Here's the floor plan. These are the entrances that we need to lock up.
That was a very shocking moment of maturity for many of us, because we all ended up taking over this building, and like it happened in the middle of the night.
And it is a risk because the college could have reacted in any number of different ways.
You just stay there, and you just stay there.
It was a while.
Nobody really said, that's FBI, but there were people sitting around.
I was like, okay, do we stay? Do we go? What do we do?
So what would you imagine? You imagine what, they'd have to like blow the doors open or something?
It was like something out of Lord and the Flies, a socio-psychic
like
study of how people can fall apart.
Let's set the stage of where we were as a country, as a world at that point. The late 1970s are not only the beginning of a new Amherst College that includes women, it is a transitional time for the U.S. and the world as a whole. The hugely controversial and devastating Vietnam War had finally ended in 1975, due in no small part to protests across the U.S., largely by college students. Jimmy Carter was the U.S. president, presiding over the aftermath of the Civil Rights Movement, followed by the Black Power movement and the Women's Liberation Movement at home, and trying to respond to the growing international movement to end apartheid in South Africa, led by Nelson Mandela from his prison cell on Robben Island and his wife on the outside, Winnie Mandela.
Our leaders called on President Botha to remove violence, to free all those who have been imprisoned, and to allow the return of all those who have been driven into exile.
College students were significant in building support for the anti-apartheid movement inside the U.S., and Black women played huge roles in both the civil rights and Black Power movements, forming the majority of members of the Black Panther Party. And all of these forces were present and at play at Amherst. Only a few years into coeducation, Black women are already at the forefront of the struggle for Black empowerment and liberation.
The late 70s was a time when a lot of students at campuses across the nation were protesting and wanting their schools to divest themselves from businesses that were propping up the South African apartheid regime.
That's the Honorable Denise Francois, class of 1980.
You're in college, you're learning about ideals and oppression and, fighting for your rights. And we're kind of sort of in a way supporting this oppression. The administration or the trustees weren't paying attention, or they weren't moving fast enough.
Like many protest movements, there were several causes for the 1979 Converse Takeover. For many students, the objective was to get Amherst to divest from apartheid South Africa. Others were protesting the potential loss of Amherst's Black freshman orientation. And just a quick note about Black freshman orientation, because several of our alumni have spoken about it throughout this series. This was a program sponsored by the college where entering Black students were invited to campus to acclimate themselves to their new surroundings a short time before the rest of the students arrived.
The cause, the issue was shutting down Black freshman orientation.
Sheila Maddox, class of 1980.
And that was personal to me. It was the part of me that wanted to be a rebel and do something and, be somewhat badass, if you pardon the expression.
As the temperature was heating up around these issues, there was a particularly disturbing incident on campus, what appeared to be a hate crime directed at Black students. Here is Annette Sanderson, class of 1982.
I just remember we were notified that there was a cross was burned on campus in front of the Charles Drew House.
On Monday, April 16th, 1979, a cross is burned at Charles Drew, the Black cultural house on campus.
And I remember us all being in the Charles Drew House, coming to the Charles Drew House, and it was very upsetting, very upsetting. I remember calling my mother in the middle of the night crying that and saying, they're trying to hurt us, they're trying to kill us, I'm scared.
Naturally, the Black students were shaken. Later that same night, the president of the college, John William Ward, moves forward with his decision to no longer hold Black freshman orientation. His stated reason was that they can hold the Black freshman orientation during the main orientation, during a day or two that might be set aside. The Black Student Union, in response, releases a statement, arguing why they need to keep it, saying, among other things, that the Black students would benefit from coming to campus before the rest of the students arrive, because it would give them a better opportunity to consider the problems they will soon face in a predominantly white institution. On Tuesday, students begin to sit in the administrative offices inside Converse Hall.
So I don't know whose idea it was, but it was take over Converse. We're going to sit in to get their attention. And a bunch of students went in and I followed.
The sit-ins in the administrative building in Converse Hall continue around the clock. In the middle of the night the next Monday, a group of 70-plus students, both Black and white, take over the building. they chained the doors while locking themselves inside Converse Hall.
I took the schematics out and I said, well, here's the building. Here's the floor plan. These are the entrances that we need to lock up.
Did you get chains? Tell me, how did that happen?
Yeah, we got chains. I said, we'll need chains for these. I don't know where we got the chains. I know I didn't buy them on my meager income, but we did get them and we did bolt the doors, and there may have been a couple of bike locks involved.
It was interesting to have a group of people who were impassioned about something enough so that they would break social norms.
That's Dr. Susan Prattis, class of 1980.
And it is a risk because the college could have reacted in any number of different ways, risk their academic work and their academic futures and potentially their employment futures.
There were people in there that I did not recognize as students, and people were telling me, don't sit with them, they're FBI. Because when they had the cross burning, the FBI came to the campus, and so you're sitting in a group on the floor, and there's these other people in the group, and like, who are you? What year are you? I've never seen you in class before.
I was on the radio, and you go on for your slot, and then whatever that was, and then you just don't get off.
Dr. Kelly Jones, class of 1981, MacArthur Fellow and renowned art historian and curator, was a DJ at the college radio station. When it came time for her slot, she took over the station in solidarity with those inside Converse Hall.
There's other programming coming, but no, you just stay there. And you just stay there and you broadcast and you cheer your folks on and you do that and you shout out to the people who are in Converse.
So you're in WAMH and your slot is over and the next students come in and you just kind of look at them and are like, no.
You just don't open the door. It just doesn't happen. It's on. You just stay there.
Fight the power. Fight the power.
So when Kelly told me this story, I instantly thought of Samuel Jackson, the DJ in the film Do the Right Thing, who's bearing witness to the demonstration protest that happens against Sal's Pizzeria by the majority Black residents of the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood.
Wake up! Wake up, wake up, wake up! Up you wake, up you wake, up you wake, up you wake!
Meanwhile, the students continue the occupation of Converse, and the hours stretch into days.
It was about 3 days. And, we're taking classes on civil disobedience. This was our time. This was our opportunity. That's what is it? Good trouble. We were in trouble.
On Monday at 8:30 a.m., the president announces that all of those students who have taken over the building, locked the doors, are now suspended.
So you have to have admiration for people who are willing to do that.
There was national news coverage.
At 1:30 p.m. that Tuesday, the students come out of the building and end the occupation after receiving assurances that the administration and the president of the college would hear their concerns.
I remember getting back to my room and my mom calling me and saying, "You're not a part of that, are you?" And I said, "Of course not."
Here's Leanne Shelton, class of 1980.
Apparently there was a picture in Newsweek, and my father's like, I didn't expect to see you on the steps of Converse Hall, and I didn't see you to college for that. I'm like, I know, don't worry about it.
If my parents see this, I don't think I ever told them. They still don't know.
There's a hearing at the college, and one by one, the students walk up to sign a statement.
Yes, I did it. And I said, I'm going to be like John Hancock, and I'm going to sign my name big and broad so the king can read my signature without his spectacles.
I remember actually a colleague of mine saying, yeah, well, those Amherst students, they're always taking over something. That's just a history of Amherst College. It's like it's a radical school in that way.
In the end, Black freshman orientation was still canceled. However, the college agreed to consider a divestment from apartheid South Africa, and Amherst finally divested completely in 1985. Soon after the Converse Takeover, students learned that the cross on the Charles Drew House lawn was actually burned by Black students.
The FBI came to the campus and did an investigation, and the wood in the basement of Drew House matched the wood of the cross.
The Black students responsible were intent on highlighting racism on the Amherst College campus and in the United States generally. Those students were suspended from Amherst College, but to the college's credit, they were invited back and did go on to graduate from Amherst.
What it turned out was it was actually 2 Black students that burned the cross. They did it to draw attention, and they got expelled, and that crushed us as well. It was really devastating, but both of those guys graduated. They brought them back. After they expelled them. They brought them back. 3 or 4 years later, they both graduated from Amherst.
The 1979 takeover wasn't the first or the last takeover of Converse Hall. As just one other example, in 1992, right around the time of the Rodney King verdict and the Uprising in LA, students at Amherst took over Converse for 2 days. The 1992 takeover was initiated by 2 Black women. The students made a series of demands related to persistent and unfortunately widespread issues like the lack of faculty diversity. One outcome was the creation of an affirmative action officer in 1993, later to be reborn as the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Our second story of activism is about STEM education at Amherst.
I'm Rachel Nelson. I'm class of 1999. When I was a kid, I had a really strong interest in hard sciences. I wanted to be an astronomer and a poet. But when I came to Amherst, it was to major in physics. And for many reasons, including not really being prepared for being away from home and feeling really out of place, both racially and class-wise, I struggled academically my first year of college. I didn't see many people who looked like me in the hard science classes, and when I struggled, it was hard for me to know who to turn to or what to do, and I just got angry and felt defeated. A lot of my classmates made decisions around what to study based on their dreams and what they were interested in doing after Amherst. I can't count the number of times white classmates intimated that the only reason I made it to Amherst was because of affirmative action. I can hear that word only when they said these things to me. It would have been really wonderful if I hadn't stopped studying science, which I still love today.
That is not just an anecdote. We heard from multiple Black women about their aspirations for careers in the sciences. Here's Cindy Jean, class of 2007.
There's a reason I'm not a doctor today, right?
When she started at Amherst, she was pre-med.
I walked into that program thinking, this is my path, this is my journey, and it was just one blow after the next.
Cindy felt like Amherst College thwarted her in her dream of becoming a doctor.
And, Nichelle, I'm not a, arrogant person, but I'm not dumb, I'm not, if I work hard at it, or if I spend time in it, I'll figure it out. But I just couldn't master it in the pre-med program. And I never, in the 4 years, I never met a person who looked like me.
One of the issues Cindy faced was a complete inability to build relationships with her STEM professors.
I remember going into office hours and feeling like I can't connect with any of these professors. I mean, they're nice, and I get he's explaining it. He's just saying the same thing he said in class again in office hours. I can't find a way in. And that was drastically different in the Black Studies department. It was drastically different in the French courses I took, both at Amherst and at the 5 colleges. I saw people who looked like me in those programs. I connected to people who, in some ways, spoke the same language I spoke, or who were at least willing to hear my voice as a part of the conversation and learning. I couldn't do it in pre-med. And that stayed with me for a long time, feeling like a failure from that program.
In our conversation, Cindy said that it's not like it was just one science class here or there. The problem kept coming up. She told me a story about one of her biology classes.
I loved biology. I thought if there is anything I could major in, it was going to be bio. I'd done well my first year in bio at the school. I'd done well in high school. I could not wait for this next bio course in the series. And the professor, I thought I had started off strong, this was my moment. I was ready to show off. And I remember going to her after class and saying, oh, you introduced something that was new. I had not thought about it. And she said to me, I don't have time for this. You can come and see me during office hours, which is completely not like Amherst at all. That's professors used to talk to you, walking to the dining hall and I thought, again, what did I miss? But I could sense that there was just something about maybe how I presented, or maybe there was something I was doing in class she didn't like. And I just, that was another shutting down moment.
These are just two examples. We heard this story over and over again. And at least since the 1990s, Black women at Amherst have tried to do something about this. When Amani Brown got to college, she was a gifted student who had dreams of becoming a doctor. But right from the beginning, and for the first time in her life, she struggled with the coursework.
I spoke to some of the professors, they would say things like, well, we don't start at an intro level at Amherst on purpose. We start, second or third year. And I thought, wow, is that fair to recruit people under the guises of educating them in a particular area, and then kind of this bait and switch where you're not being educated at the introductory level, even though you can absolutely learn the material.
To unpack this a little more, the issue is that Amherst was teaching its introductory STEM courses at an advanced level, appropriate for students who wanted to be scientific researchers, but not necessarily for those who wanted to be practicing doctors or simply educate themselves about science, the latter being a much larger group from a wider range of educational backgrounds. What this meant in practice is that students who did not have an elite level of STEM education in high school were starting off at a disadvantage when they came to Amherst. Dr. Ruth Simmons, a former president of Smith College and Brown University and a Black woman, has said, with STEM education, we can see a tendency to use introductory classes as a means to eliminate. These introductory classes serve to, quote, knock you out of eligibility, so that you then have to switch to some secondary interest. One model is about eliminating people so that there is a special class of achievers at the highest end. The other model is about making sure that everybody gets through. End quote. Amani's sister Ashaki, also class of 1997, who, by the way, is now a successful medical doctor, was having the same trouble as her sister in her science classes. The two of them started looking deeper into the issue.
We found a pattern, unfortunately, of systematic disenfranchisement of people of color, women, and actually publicly educated white men in the sciences in Amherst. And it was disheartening because, some of the pattern was relatively invisible. I think people were so talented that they would pivot into other areas. They would go into the humanities and they would excel, but they would leave their dreams of being physicians and scientists behind. I realized that a lot of us were carrying a secret, that we're carrying some shame.
They realized they'd have to take matters into their own hands to make a change at Amherst. This was a different kind of protest. No chains, bike locks, or overnighting in Converse necessary. Instead, they decided to invite a number of faculty and administrators to Drew House, including Associate Dean of Students, Onawumi Jean Moss.
That was the most dignified, student-led protest Amherst has had before then or since. It was dignified and student voices ruled. Student voices. Faculty had to sit, and when they arrived at the Charles Drew House, there was tea and coffee and miniature desserts in the foyer where they walked in. They thought they had walked in on a party and had walked into the wrong place. The house was decorated for Christmas and Kwanzaa. On their chairs was the program of the evening on parchment paper. Students did that. I came early so that I could help them set things up because I'm an interior designer by gift. And I'm good too, baby. I am really good. When the faculty walked in, I was there to say, this is for you. They were absolutely stunned.
And we told the truth about our experiences in the sciences and really asked, frankly, and with some depth of real desire to connect and relate, not to accuse anyone of anything. We asked to have a different relationship with the school around what academic support could look like for everyone who was interested in excelling in the quantitative skills.
By the 2000s, Amherst began taking steps to address the issue of diversity in STEM. They established the Moss Quantitative Center, named for Dean Moss, which is a place that teaches students how to sharpen their quantitative skills so that they can perform better in their STEM courses. But Amherst clearly had and has more work to do in supporting STEM students and their aspirations. More recently, in 2015, Amherst chemistry professor Sheila Jaswal and her students created a program called Being Human in STEM. This is an initiative, much of which was inspired by Black women, to continue to expose how STEM curricula can discriminate. This initiative originated at Amherst and has turned into a model for other elite schools, including Yale and Brown, which have since introduced similar programs. The college administration also points to the success of the mathematics department, as math is now one of the fastest growing majors at the college across all demographics. While deeper issues certainly remain, Amherst faculty and administrators listen to Black women, have taken initiative, and Amherst has become a leader in this domain. Our third story is about the Amherst Uprising.
No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police. No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police.
It's the story that's ignited fierce passions across the nation. Trayvon Martin, an unarmed Black teenager, was shot down by a white neighborhood watchman who claimed self-defense.
Police in Ferguson, Missouri once again had to put down and head off violence in the streets following the shooting days ago of a young unarmed Black man who was supposed to head off to college this week.
Let's remind ourselves about what was going on in 2015. Black Lives Matter had just been founded in 2013 by 3 Black women in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the killing of unarmed teenager Trayvon Martin. Michael Brown had been killed in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, and Eric Garner had been killed by police in New York. In 2015, Sandra Bland had been killed while in the custody of police, and there were many others. The nation was watching a series of police killings of unarmed Black men and women play out on video and over social media. On campus, the Black Student Union decides to hold a series of Black Lives Matter events. And these events have been planned and spearheaded by several Black women who've put up posters around the campus advertising the lectures and discussions that will take place. These posters are covered over by other students on campus. Here's Katiana Dandridge, class of 2018, and one of the organizers of what became the Amherst Uprising of 2015. At that time, she was still just a sophomore.
The older girls that were in BSU, they had put together a Black Lives Matter campaign where they had like a week. They did all the programming and postering and all that stuff. And then our posters and stuff like that were defaced by what presumed to be the Amherst Republican group. People started putting up posters, flyers over the Black Lives Matter flyers, talking about abortions in Black households and talking about, do Black Lives Matter to the aborted Black babies, or it's just like stuff like that. And they had pictures of Black babies on them too, and it just felt really like nasty. But I don't think the administration ever really did anything meaningful regarding that incident. And it was really hurtful. And then all this stuff was just constantly happening in the country. So everybody was really kind of like in an emotionally fragile space.
Much like the 1979 Converse Takeover, there were several forces at play in 2015.
It was kind of like a series of things and incidents and emotions and stuff that were building up to it. But it just so happened that one night, me and my friends were all hanging out. Like, should we do a protest? Let's make some posters or something. And I was like, let's do it. Let's do it.
In response to the backlash against the Black Lives Matter events, as well as other events happening at the time at Yale, University of Missouri, and other campuses, Katiana and a few of her friends decide to organize a short gathering in support of students at Mizzou and Yale. A Latina student from Hampshire College overhears them.
And she was like, oh, are you guys doing this? And, if you make a Facebook event, I'll tell everybody about it at Hampshire.
The next day, Katiana and her friends show up at Frost Library for the protest, and the place is packed.
And then just more and more people started pouring in. We were like, oh my God. And then eventually we got word that so many people were coming and that some professors had canceled their classes to let students be able to come. And we were sitting in the library watching it snowball kind of like out of control. And at first it was just kind of like more of a silent or more of a poignant demonstration. And then eventually one of my friends stood up and told her story about how she felt the ways that Amherst had failed her as a Black student. And she brought up a point about how the rate of Black female students that take time off. So once she said that, it kind of started, again, a snowball effect. People were standing up, saying their stories about, when professors had been racist to them in the classroom, or when peers had shut them out of stuff. Like somebody talked about going into the socials. They were still around at the time. And walking up the stairs, and it was a party going on that it was just assumed, it was like a party, but somebody slammed the door in her face because she was with a bunch of Black females, and just all types of really damaging stuff that people had been through.
Katiana and her friends had hoped for a large demonstration, but nothing of this scale. And they found in this moment that by creating a space, they uncovered a much deeper need for expression and outpouring.
It was very, very emotional. It was one of the most vulnerable things I have ever experienced in such a large group of people, ever in my life. It's just like something happened in the air, in the room that day at Frost that had everybody just sharing what was on their heart. The whole protest pretty much shut the school down.
It grows so big that President Biddy Martin, who's on her way to Japan, decides to cancel her trip to return immediately to campus to listen to and respond to the students.
Administration was really working overtime to kind of get some of this stuff addressed to coax us out of there.
Katiana and the other students did not plan for this moment, but it was a moment of opportunity to initiate real change. As the days went on, they began negotiating for specific issues that came to the surface during the protest itself. And as they're negotiating with the college administration, they're also getting support from across the Amherst community.
The librarians were helpful in, they gave us access to the technology, the tools, anything that we needed to, keep putting together those demands or working around the table and doing all of that. The cafe, they were giving people food, and different clubs and groups were bringing pizza and supplies and cookies, all that kind of stuff. One of the camping groups, one of the hiking clubs, they brought all their supplies and sleeping bags and everything for people who needed them. So it was a group effort in a lot of ways. What got us out? We got an official commitment from Biddy Martin, her office, and the faculty, the dean of faculty, to address these things. I don't know if she actually signed anything, but I know it was an actual, an agreement for a lot of those things to be addressed and to be put in place.
The sit-in comes to an end after 3 days. President Biddy Martin and her office make a commitment to examine the students' concerns. Soon, the college introduced several new initiatives. And actually, unbeknownst to the students, many of the initiatives had been under discussion before the Amherst Uprising. In 2016, the college established the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Amherst also took bolder efforts to diversify the faculty and started a Latinx and Latin American Studies major. And around the same time, though not directly related to the Amherst Uprising, the college completed the process of changing the mascot from Lord Jeffrey Amherst to something less offensive and genocidal. Amherst College is no longer the Lord Jeffs. We are now the Mammoths. In many ways, Amherst College is further along that path to becoming a better version of itself. All of these stories have something to teach us. Despite the consistent efforts of both students and certain supportive faculty and administrators, students often feel that they've exhausted all other channels and their concerns are not being heard or adequately addressed. So the only way to draw attention to these issues is to take collective action and protest. But it shouldn't always require massive collective action for Amherst to understand how many students are experiencing the college. As we learned in episode 1, Amherst College is an institution that was not originally intended for women, but for indigent men of piety, and an institution in which virtually all of the early students were white men, leads to dynamics that still simmer below the surface to this day. They don't necessarily show up in term papers, thesis projects, or yearbook captions, but these experiences are just as important. They build upon each other and have a cumulative impact on the lives of students. So where do these stories live? Where can we find them? How can the college hear these stories and learn from them? Before we end this episode, I want to tell you about one place where we and the college, and other colleges and universities for that matter, can look. An Instagram account called Black Amherst Speaks, created by a Black woman, Kendall Ash, class of 2018, and another Black Amherst alumna.
It was called the Black at movement, and so it was Black at Spence, Black at Nightingale, Black at Dalton. There were a couple of different elite, private high schools that had started their own Instagram accounts, which would basically promote the voices of different students. And my co-founder, went to Spence, and so she said, "You know what? We need to do this. We need to do this for Amherst because this has gone on too long. Where there is no mechanism for people to report so many things that we know are happening." But there are stories out there, and there are people who have things to say. We need to do this.
This is one of those instances where social media furthers the cause of progress and activism. This is where students anonymously or with their names can post stories about what has happened to them while being Black at Amherst.
It was such a powerful thing to see how many people came forward with stories about different interactions with students and other athletes and professors and administrators. And I mean, again, it's not a good thing that these people had these stories, but it was a powerful thing, how people came out in droves. I think when we first started it, we wanted to make it clear to people who are watching us that this is started by 2 Black women alums. So there's nothing to lose. We are not officially affiliated. This is an independent thing where we wanted people's voices to be heard. And I think now we have over 3,500 followers. We got featured in the New York Times. It was just a time where people said, you know what? We need to find our own way to get these stories heard. And I think we did that. And I'm really proud of it.
I asked Kendall to read me some of the posts from the Instagram account.
Throughout my 4 years at Amherst, the Val entryway became very hostile territory for me. It seemed like I was absolutely invisible in that space as a Black woman. When organizations were tabling, I noticed that I wasn't being asked to participate in whatever events they were planning. It got to the point where I actively started to keep track of the fact that the white people in front of or behind me would be met with the shouts and pleas for their engagement only for people to avoid eye contact with me. It was honestly so dehumanizing and felt very exclusionary. What about me was so unapproachable? I wonder if any other Black people can identify with this because it was actually so representative of my college experience as a Black woman in general. Anonymous. I once set off the alarm in my room because I was blow drying my hair. ACPD knocked on my door. I held up the blow dryer and apologized and proceeded to tell him what set off the alarm. He nodded his head, then proceeded to walk in my room without saying anything. What really frightened me was he let the door shut. I told myself just to stand still and everything will be fine, as he proceeded to look around the room for something else that would have set the alarm, such as a substance. It was frightening as an experience, as I was alone in the room, and at the time, I can't help but think his actions were led by bias that day. Anonymous.
How has the college responded to Black Amherst Speaks?
So the college did not directly respond to us for a while. I think most likely because we're calling them out a little bit, right? I could sit on the task force as a student and say to them, you know, Black students really feel discriminated against, and would kind of get blank stares like, in what way? And now we have these like concrete examples. So I think at the end of the day, we wanted acknowledgement just in that just to know that the school like has heard these people, and just to know that they know these kinds of things are happening. So what are you going to do about it? And my personal goal, right, was this bias response protocol, which my understanding is it did launch last fall. Now, is it being marketed as necessary? Is it being conveyed to the student body as necessary? I don't know. I'm not on campus. But, you know, I guess at the end of the day, I would hope that seeing these stories firsthand would show to them that this type of protocol or system was way more necessary than we thought, and that it needed to be established so that people actually have a place to go, so that alums that wrote in 10 years later didn't have to wait 10 years to tell their story, and people that are there on campus right now can have somewhere to go to actually have like real action taken on some of the things that are happening. So I think that's our goal, really, at the end of the day.
There's a long history of student activism at Amherst, and in many instances, Black women students have led the college towards meaningful change. Their impact is often unacknowledged, but also undeniable. As a result of their efforts, Amherst has become a place where more and more students have the opportunity to reach their potential and begin to discover who they are going to be in the world. But as an institution, Amherst remains far from perfect. So where are we today? What steps is Amherst College taking to make itself a place that serves a wider range of people? We'll tackle that in our next episode, the last of this series. Thanks for listening to Black Women of Amherst College. This series is a production of Amherst College, WC1 Studios, and Zell Division. I'm Nichelle Carr, executive producer and host. It was edited by Michael Osborne and produced by Jennifer Hsu and Trisha Nelson. Our engineers were Erica Huang and Evan Viola. Special thanks to all the women and other members of the Amherst College community who participated in and supported the project, including all of our storyteller interviewees, Tanae Adaro-Howard, President Biddy Martin, Mike Kelly, and the project steering committee, Rhonda Cobham-Sander, Martin Garner, Sandy Janelius, Cree Polk, Kate Salop, Bette Schumacher, Victoria Wilson, and Norm Jones. This series is dedicated to all of the Black women of Amherst College, past, present, and future.